freedom and democracy be an explicit national interest of the United States? Or do you see that as simply a desirable benefit that will follow if we pursue other policies?
I think we should, with every source of our skill and capability and foresight, promote American values, Western values of human rights, democracy, free trade, and freedom everywhere in the world. That's what I believe. I believe President Bush in that statement was absolutely right. That doesn't mean we do it in an unwise way, or that we invade every country that has a different power structure and so forth. It means we're very thoughtful and strategic as to how we help move countries towards human rights and freedom and free trade and democracy. That liberty is our goal, and that is the ultimate way for us to preserve peace and prosperity for ourselves and for people throughout the world. It is interesting that there shouldn't be a lot of debate about that. And the reason I say that is that under Harry Truman, following the Second World War, Harry Truman and Dean Acheson, then Secretary of State, really rewrote America's foreign policy. They concluded that the old foreign policy, which was largely based on isolationism, had nonetheless drawn us into 2 world wars, where 600,000 people of our own people had lost lives, where there had been tragedy of untold proportion for humanity around the world, and that therefore we had to adopt a new strategy. And Dean Acheson wrote a book called Present at the Creation. He basically said that he was present at the time when Harry Truman and others created a new foreign policy for America. And the foreign policy had, at least in my view, 3 fundamental principles. Number 1, we would be involved in the world. We would not go home and sort of be by ourselves and hope everybody took care of themselves. We would be involved. Number 2, we would promote American values. We were the nation that would be the champion of liberty, democracy, free trade, free enterprise, and he helped establish institutions that would help make those things possible. And number 3, we would be strong. We would make it very clear to the world that we would defend those values, we would defend ourselves, we would have our own national strength, and we would link with allies around the world, locking arm in arm, making sure that together our strength was such that we could defend those things we believed in. Now, I happen to believe that over the last year, and I don't want to be partisan here, but I am partisan. I believe that over the last year that the president has taken action which has confused our friends around the world and has made people wonder, are we still following that strategy? In my view, while the rhetoric is unfortunate, the actions are even more unfortunate. The rhetoric included the president apologizing around the world, saying America was arrogant, dismissive, derisive, that we have dictated to other nations. No, Mr. President. We have freed dictators. We freed other nations from dictators. And so the rhetoric was bad. But then the actions. I mean, Honduras' Supreme Court says their pro-Chavez, anti-American president has violated their constitution. He's removed from office. Our president insists he get put back. Democratic voices of dissent, at least, take to the streets in Iran. Our president has nothing to say. Can you imagine Ronald Reagan having nothing to say in that circumstance? Or JFK, or Bill Clinton. The Czech Republic and Poland agree to house a missile shield for Europe from a rogue nation like Iran and go to their population to get approval for such a thing. On the very day of the, not celebration, of the recognition of the 70th anniversary of the Soviet Union's invasion of Poland, we announced that we're pulling out that missile defense system, much to the shock and horror of the people there. Why did we do that? With no notice to our friends, to our allies, apparently to reset relations with Russia. What do we get for that? New tough sanctions on Iran? Nothing. Nothing. Israel, our best ally in the Middle East. The president goes to the United Nations and speaks and castigates Israel at the United Nations. There are a few bodies that are more anti-Israel than that one. Castigates them. Has nothing to say about the Palestinians launching 7,000 rockets into Israel and killing Israeli citizens. In my view, the foreign policy of this nation must be firm in saying we will be strong. If we have problems with our allies, we'll battle it behind closed doors and come out hugging and locking arms with one another. We will also promote democracy in the best ways we can throughout the world. That is our foreign policy. I think we're making a mistake.
No worries. When President Obama was elected, there were stories from all around the world about the enormous level of happiness and excitement and celebratory welcoming of this new American administration. Clearly, in the year, not quite year and a half since then, some of that popularity, even worldwide, has fallen off. Will there always, though, be a foreign market for Americans who are prepared to criticize America? That's part one. Part two, given the litany of, you call it the American Apology Tour that the president's been going around the world delivering, are there times when it is appropriate, in your view, for an American president to be apologizing on behalf of the United States abroad?
Well, it's hard for me to consider a circumstance like that in the abstract. Have we made mistakes? Of course. Have we acknowledged those mistakes? Yes, we have. But in the balance sheet of what America has contributed to the world versus the mistakes we've made, there's no comparison. In that balance sheet, our economic system, now being adopted, as I indicated, throughout the world, has lifted, if not billions, at least hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Our economic system has. And the sacrifice of our fighting men and women has brought freedom to people around the world. So the idea of America's president running around the world apologizing, building his own popularity, and at the same time adding fuel to the fires of those who think America has something to apologize for, is, in my opinion, a very misguided approach and strategy. Instead, I would acknowledge we made mistakes and then talk about the future. Look, let's talk about where we're going to go and how important it is for America to remain strong. I heard, I just have to relate something which a number of you heard me say before. It's Shimon Peres, the president of Israel, was in Boston. This was several years ago. It was during the height of the Iraq conflict, and it was before the surge, so the conflict was not going very well. And I was in a department where someone asked him, Mr. Peres, what do you think about the conflict in Iraq? And he said, before I answer that, I have to put something in context. He said, America is unique in the history of the world. He said, in the history of the world, whenever there's been conflict, the nation that wins takes land from the nation that loses, because land is a source of value on the planet. He said, one nation in history, this during the last century, was willing to lay down hundreds of thousands of lives for freedom, for itself and for its friends, and took no land as recompense. No land. He said, that's America. America is unique in the history of the world. And Colin Powell went on to say that the only land we took following the Second World War was enough land to bury our dead. This is a unique nation. When the British press correctly says that our president was more critical of his own country on foreign soil than any president in American history, that was not, in my view, a great moment for our president. Despite the applause he got elsewhere, let's make sure that America is respected and revered for our great contributions around the world.
I want to talk about the other threat that you mentioned, the threat of international jihadists. Just yesterday, the Obama administration let it be known that it will be removing the terms Islamic extremism and jihad from the main document that sets out what's known as the national security strategy. If you had the ability to do so, would you put those terms back in?
Absolutely. They're in my book. I use the word jihadism because that's the word they use. That is the word which the jihadists use to describe their movement. And so there's some source of rationale for using that term, but it is a recognition that there is a movement in the world of Islam. It's a narrow slice of Islam that believes in radical, violent overthrow of alternative forms of leadership. And it starts, by the way, with attacks on its own, what we might call moderate Muslims or mainstream Muslims. It talks about removing leaders in their own nations. And some of the earliest assassinations, like that of Anwar Sadat, flowed from this kind of sentiment at its earliest stages. And so it's a threat to the world of Islam. It's a threat to the world of the West. It's a threat even to Russia, as we saw with the bombings and their trains just last week. I mean, this is a global threat, and it is a philosophy which has a number of adherents around the world and is one that we have to recognize. I simply don't understand where the administration is taking us. I don't understand. I mean, remember when there were the shootings at Fort Hood, and the immediate response from the White House was, "Don't jump to conclusions. This may just be a criminal act." It's like, what in the world are you thinking? I mean, can you not read what's being said? What this person has said.